Children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the classroom, riding the afternoon breeze that carried the sweet aroma of honeysuckle. The teacher, Miss Valencia, took a moment to breathe in that gentle scent before turning her attention back to the group of 20 young faces before her. It was the cusp of spring, a time when everything seemed alive with possibility. Fields turned emerald, buds burst open with color, and the songs of birds filled the sky. Although Miss Valencia's classroom was adorned with charts of multiplication tables and grammar rules, she believed the most important lessons couldn't always be captured on a chalkboard. Each day, she looked for opportunities to teach her students about wonder, patience, and empathy, convinced these were just as vital to their futures as any academic skill. Her students were a vibrant mixture of personalities. There was bashful Maisie, who doodled hummingbirds in her notebook, always imagining whimsical bird families in secret self-drawn worlds. Max, her polar opposite, excelled in every subject but had trouble opening up about his feelings. He often buried them beneath pointed questions about logic and facts. Tarek told jokes so often that he'd become the unofficial class clown, enthusiastic to the point of distracting himself and his classmates. And quiet Hillary preferred the back corner desk, hunching over books, and occasionally looking up with eyes that held a depth Ms. Valencia found remarkable. Each child had a story, a soft center hidden beneath a layer of mischief or shyness. It was a classroom of constant motion and emotion, with Ms. Valencia as their steady guide. One late afternoon, when dismissal was just minutes away, an unusual hush swept through the classroom. So everyone heard it, a tiny peep like a plea. Miss Valencia paused in the midst of her final instructions. The cry sounded again, delicate, urgent. Looking out the window, she spotted a crumpled nest in the courtyard bush and something fluttering beside it. Thinking it might be a stray leaf caught in the wind, she squinted closer. But then a fragile little creature moved, nearly invisible among the branches. Without hesitation, Miss Valencia motioned for the students to gather their belongings and follow her. Their departure from class turned into an impromptu nature expedition. Outside, the group crept toward the bush, hearts pounding with anticipation. The nest sat partially dismantled at the bush's lowest branch. On the ground nearby, a baby hummingbird sprawled in the grass, its feathers not fully grown, quivering wings too weak to lift itself. Wide-eyed children circled around it, glancing from the tiny avian to their teacher. Miss Valencia gently scooped the trembling creature into her cupped hands. She felt its rapid heartbeat against her palms and realized this was no ordinary lesson. The dismissive final bell rang, and some of the children looked toward the school bus line. However, when Miss Valencia's eyes met theirs, an unspoken understanding passed through them. Nothing more important was happening in the world than saving this fragile life. Words spread quickly among parents waiting in cars. Miss Valencia explained that she would look after the little hummingbird, ensuring that it received warmth and nourishment before taking it to a wildlife rescue. Several parents lingered, touched by the sight of a woman so dedicated that she would rearrange her schedule to care for something so tiny. Moments later, Miss Valencia found herself with a growing audience of enthralled children, their parents, and even a few curious teachers, all standing in the courtyard. Carefully, she fashioned a makeshift box using a small tin from the art supply cabinet, lined with soft tissues to cradle the baby bird. "It's still alive," she said with conviction, "and while there's a heartbeat, we can help." That evening, she called a local wildlife rehabilitator who gave her instructions on feeding techniques and the specialized diet hummingbirds require. Ms. Valencia hung up, feeling both anxious and hopeful. She created a simple sugar water solution and placed a drop on the end of a cotton swab. The baby bird's beak opened by instinct to sip, its thin tongue darting out in surprising speed. Ms. Valencia blinked back tears of relief as she watched the bird swallow. Nursing a hummingbird back to health was not something she'd imagined doing, yet it felt as though her entire life, her passion for nature, her teaching, her belief in compassion, had led to this moment. As she fed the tiny creature under the soft glow of a desk lamp, she gently whispered, "You're safe here. We'll get you stronger." The next morning, Mrs. Valencia guiltily left her new charge at home in a small habitat she'd made from a wicker basket, tissues, and a heating pad set on low. She wanted to keep the baby hummingbird in the classroom, but the rehabilitator advised minimizing contact with large groups for the bird's well-being. However, Miss Valencia had an idea. During homeroom, she told the class about the baby hummingbird's first night. She described how its beak had moved, the tiny squeaks it made when hungry, and the delicate fluttering of wings that showed signs of recovery. Her students sat in rapt attention, eyes luminous with curiosity. Maisie fidgeted excitedly, raising her hand to share everything she knew about hummingbirds. Enthusiasm swept the class. Kid after kid peppered Miss Valencia with inquiries on how to care for wildlife, with Tarek suddenly thoughtful for once, and even Max showing a spark of wonder on his usually stoic face. By the day's end, the classroom felt transformed. The usual restlessness had become a shared focus on the baby hummingbird's well-being. So during a reading exercise, Mrs. Valencia spread out a slew of books about birds, encouraging her students to pick titles and read out sections that resonated with them. Some learned that hummingbirds can flap their wings over 50 times a second. Others discovered how they can migrate thousands of miles despite their minuscule size. Every fact read in hushed excitement seemed to reverberate with a new sense of respect, as though the slender wings of that defenseless little bird had touched each child's imagination. Day by day, Miss Valencia updated the class. She shared small achievements, how the hummingbird, now affectionately nicknamed Flick, displayed more energy every morning, how it began to flutter in short bursts as if testing the air, and how it seemed to sing quietly when fed. As Flick progressed, Miss Valencia wondered how she might channel her students' enthusiasm into a concrete lesson that would extend beyond the bird's immediate care. She proposed a nurture project, a chance for every student to take on a small responsibility that requires gentle care. Each child would select a plant or adopt an action like picking up litter around the playground and document their observations. Through this project, Miss Valencia hoped to illustrate how empathy wasn't limited to a single creature, but an approach to all living things. The results delighted her. Maisie chose to plant a miniature succulent that would eventually bloom red flowers. She kept a daily sketch diary, capturing the succulent's progress with bright watercolors. Tarek, trying to tone down his jokes, found that focusing on a simple spider plant gave him a sense of calm he'd never experienced. He'd linger after class sometimes, excited to report how many new leaves had grown. Even Max, who insisted on verifying scientifically that hummingbirds were part of the Trochilidae family, became enamored with a small rabbit figurine he found at a thrift shop. He built a miniature environment in the classroom for it, as if caring for an imaginary creature was his personal parallel to nurturing Flick. Each child was discovering something about themselves in the gentle act of giving attention to the small, quiet things around them. Meanwhile, Miss Valencia was growing attached to Flick in ways she never anticipated. Each morning, she checked Flick's temperature, ensured it had proper sugar water mixtures, and monitored the progress of its feather growth. Every bit of improvement fueled a deeper bond. And yet, Miss Valencia knew the ultimate lesson would be in letting the bird go free. But Flick was still too young, and there were days when the bird seemed lethargic. Hummingbirds are fragile creatures, and Miss Valencia worried constantly whether she was doing everything right. One morning, Flick barely moved. Eyes half-lidded, the tiny bird refused the sugar water mixture Miss Valencia offered. Fear weighed heavily on her as she paced the house and made frantic phone calls to the rehabilitator, who assured her that temporary setbacks were normal and recommended adjusting the temperature of Flick's heating pad. That same afternoon, Ms. Valencia decided to bring Flick briefly into the classroom in a secure, well-ventilated carrier. As soon as the children saw Flick, their little faces lit with a collective gasp of joy. Carefully, Miss Valencia opened the carrier's small door to show them the fragile avian inside. Flick's dark eyes flickered, and the bird seemed to peer curiously at the circle of upturned faces. Miss Valencia gently transferred Flick to her palm, demonstrating how to support the bird's tiny form. She let the children view Flick up close, though from a cautious distance, to understand the level of care required for something so delicate. Quiet overcame the classroom, creating a reverent hush that skirted the edges of awe. Even boisterous Tariq stood still, hands clasped behind his back as though in a cathedral. The moment, tender and alive, held a kind of magic that seared into their memories. When Miss Valencia lifted Flick toward an open window for just a taste of fresh air, the bird gave a slight flutter of wings. Its green and gold plumage shimmered in the sunlight, a brilliant moment that made each observer feel the triumph of life in that tiny body. The entire class seemed to breathe in unison, silently urging Flick to get better, to thrive. Miss Valencia gently brought Flick back into the carrier to ensure the calmly recuperating bird didn't overexert itself. She looked at her students, read the softness in their eyes, and realized that, in saving Flick, a powerful collective empathy was blossoming in this classroom. They were learning a calmer form of respect for nature, for each other, and for their own fragile hopes. A few days later, Flick's turnaround came like a morning sun dispersing the shadows of doubt from Miss Valencia's mind. She saw it the moment she peeked into the hummingbird's basket habitat. Flick hopped, wings buzzing rapidly, as if ready to soar. Steadier perched on Miss Valencia's finger, Flick took small sips of sugar water with more gusto than ever. Miss Valencia felt relief wash over her. The bird, who had once been on the brink of losing everything, was now brimming with new life. As if it understood, Flick would tilt its tiny head and stare at Miss Valencia with round, dark eyes, an expression that felt both grateful and eager. The teacher allowed herself a reassuring smile before hurrying off to begin her day, tucking Flick safely back into the basket. With Flick's growing strength, Ms. Valencia set up short, supervised flight spans in the enclosed porch at her home. She'd open her palms, and Flick would flit from her fingers to a branch of a potted fern. Timid at first, Flick quickly discovered the joys of exercising its wings. It darted from one perch to the next, hovered in midair, then made spectacular dives outward, out signs that the bird was inching closer to returning to the wild. Each little flight was a triumph, a symbol of the resilience ingrained in even the smallest heartbeats of nature. After each session, Miss Valencier would bring Flick carefully back into its sleeping space, cooing words of encouragement as though talking to a fragile but determined student. Inspired by this progress, Miss Valencier introduced her class to the concept of gradual independence. She explained how wild creatures need to learn to depend on their own instincts for survival lessons that can't fully be taught by humans. These same principles, she said, apply to each of them. Little by little, we grow, we find our wings, she told them. Sometimes we need a hand to hold us steady, but we also need freedom to test our strengths and grow confident in who we are. The classroom fell silent with concentrated reflection. This was more than a story about a bird. It was about their own paths, their unique hurdles and potentials, and the gentle care they must learn to offer both themselves and others. The culmination arrived sooner than Miss Valencia expected. One crisp spring morning, Flick flew from her hand with such grace that Miss Valencia sensed the bird was finally ready. The wildlife rehabilitator agreed. They settled on a weekend date to release Flick near a blooming garden, abundant with nectar-rich flowers. Miss Valencia announced to her students that the day had come for Flick's farewell, and they were invited to witness it. After permission slips were finalized, nearly the entire class and several parents gathered early on a Saturday at a local park, known for its butterfly gardens and hummingbird visits. The kids dressed in bright spring colors as if attending a celebration. Some brought flowers or homemade goodbye Flick postcards. Others just came with wide, excited smiles, anticipating a moment they would probably retell 1,000 times. At the edge of a quiet garden, Ms. Valencia set Flick's carrier on a low stone ledge. The bird's heart beat fast, as if sensing the wide expanse outside. Ms. Valencia opened the door slowly, one hand outstretched to encourage Flick, the other resting gently on the carrier's side. One step at a time, Flick hopped to the threshold, wings quivering in readiness. Quiet awe fell over the gathered group. Even the occasional hum of traffic in the distance seemed to fade. Then, as though carried by the collective breath of the onlookers, Flick soared into a fluttering glide, a tiny arc of shimmering green. For a moment, Flick hovered, bright chest catching a gold sheen from the morning sun. Then it disappeared among the early blooms, leaving the children giggling with amazement and Ms. Valencia fighting a gentle wave of tears. Throughout the crowd, a reverent hush lingered, broken here and there by murmured exclamations. It was a release that resonated with relief, pride, and hope. Ms. Valencia turned, addressing the students in a soft voice. "What just happened is a miracle," she said, "because life, no matter how small, wants to thrive when given a chance." Emotions flickered across each young face, wonder, joy, maybe even a hint of sadness at parting. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they turned their energy to the gardens. In pairs and small groups, the children pointed to flowers that might interest hummingbirds, laughing each time they spotted a darting silhouette that might be Flick. It felt as though they had each tasted a brand new dimension of empathy, taught in the silent flutter of wings. In the days following Flick's release, Miss Valencia observed subtle but meaningful changes in her classroom. Tarek's jokes tapered to thoughtful points, reflective of new sensitivity. Max's curiosity became tinged with what looked like genuine compassion, no longer just an intellectual quest for facts. Maisie's doodles began depicting entire hummingbird family scenes with vibrant color and detail, each wing carefully shaded in something akin to devotion. Even Hillary, who had mostly watched from the sidelines, found a little confidence blossoming in her daily interactions. The experience of caring for Flick had not only rescued a tiny life, but awakened something gentle and enduring in each of them. Ms. Valencia saw this daily, whether in small acts of kindness between classmates or a new appreciation for the living world outside the window. One of the most touching moments occurred a few weeks later when a sudden downpour left earthworms stranded on the playground. In the past, some children might have been amused or uninterested, but now they sprang to action. Under a drizzle of rain, they carefully scooped up the wriggling creatures and placed them in safer soil to keep them from drowning in puddles. Miss Valencia watched, her heart full. The seeds of gentle care had taken root. Through nurturing a baby hummingbird, her students had learned to see worth in the smallest forms of life. They understood, perhaps more than most children their age, that a community thrives when each member extends compassion to the vulnerable among them. Eventually, after school one day, Ms. Valencia paused by the windowsill and noticed a hummingbird flitting near the blossoming jasmine bush. It hovered, then darted to sip nectar from the white, star-shaped flowers. The bird's chest gleamed with a flash of copper gold, and Miss Valencia couldn't help but smile. Maybe it was Flick, or maybe just another hummingbird passing through on its migration. She liked to think it could be Flick, dropping by in a wordless greeting. There was no certainty to it, but that uncertainty was part of the marvel. Life thrived in small wonders, quiet mysteries, and acts of kindness that bridged classroom walls and garden paths alike. That evening, Ms. Valencia stayed late in the classroom, writing notes in her students' journals, praising their nurturing projects and quietly encouraging them to continue exploring the interplay between knowledge and kindness. She believed each child held a spark of empathy that could grow into a guiding light. Flick's story had taught them that to be gentle, to be caring, was not a weakness, but a profound strength. Nature had offered them that lesson in a frail, quivering bird, and in return they had offered it a chance to heal. Each side gave, and each side grew. With the last beam of twilight shining through the windows, Miss Valencia packed up her things, locked the door, and headed into the warm spring dusk. A gentle breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle again, stirring memories of that day she first heard Flick's plea. She closed her eyes, embracing a calm gratitude. Teaching, she mused, was less about transferring knowledge and more about awakening a sense of wonder and empathy in every mind and heart. In that sense, Flick had been not just a baby bird, but a messenger, connecting a classroom to the larger tapestry of life that thrived on compassion and care. As Ms. Valencia walked to her car, a flicker at the corner of her eye made her pause. A small shape zipped near a flowering tree by the parking lot, accompanied by the faint hum of wings no bigger than a coin. She grinned softly, noticing how dear the sound had become. Though dusk's shadows stretched long, the memory of Flick's rescue and release glowed bright in her thoughts. With that, Ms. Valencia left the school grounds, enveloped by the gentle hush of evening, holding close the vision of shimmering wings and the new empathy blossoming in her students' hearts.